All right, folks, welcome to this work session meeting for the Town Council and the School Committee together. I'm calling it to order here at 7:04. First order of business is the pledge to the flag. Please rise and join. So there's a few late arrivals here. We'll let everybody get their seats and begin the presentation on the 2015-2016 school fund transfer. All right, when you're ready, Kristen, take us away.
Good evening. So I'm going to try this with the proximity of the screen. Thank you for having us. And tonight we're prepared to speak with you about the school committee budget that was brought to the town manager on February 10th. And the first slide that's in your packet, and there are packets available for the public at the small table. Excuse me for 1 second, because I want to be able to look at you. The first slide is just a budget update of the process that's happened since we met last. On the 10th of February, the school committee approved a budget in the amount of $59,285,028, which includes the capital purchases that we spoke about during the capital budget hearing, including the technology, dual language immersion, and the cost share for the school resource officer, which is a school resource officer in grades PK through 8 that would be housed at Curtis Corner Middle School. For the benefit of folks on the school side, on March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, the town manager proposed adjustments, and last evening, the school committee approved those adjustments in the amount of $250,000 in the aforementioned items. So the school committee approved adjustment of the new budget line item is now $59,130,028. We thought it would be helpful to break down not only numerically but also visually the revenue that the school department receives. Certainly a majority of the revenue comes from the property tax transfer to schools. The second largest revenue contributor is the state aid. We also have small amounts indicated on the upper left-hand part of the slide for group home aid, Medicaid, the fund balance that we use as revenue, and then other sources of revenue, which is the smallest number. And then, of course, our expenditures, which detail clearly the largest two categories are salaries and benefits, supplies, equipment, professional services, property services, and other. I tried to make this slide as understandable as possible. It's sort of tricky to walk through the process and realize that in December, when the school committee and town council made a commitment for a budget assumption of 2% of the property tax transfer, that's really where we start. And so based on that 2%, these are the areas and line items in the budget that were recommended to decrease. The items in the top purple column are not actual cuts. They're reductions that are not needed. So out-of-district tuitions, we are trending lower, and therefore we're anticipating a small savings in that area. Reduction in advertising costs, we're trending lower. Charter school enrollment, we have been consistently trending downward. We had a change in our telephone vendor, and therefore the agreement with them is at a lower rate. We're able to save money in that area. With the implementation of the technology infusion last year and the year previous, and the expectations for the one-to-one device, our actual overall technology-related hardware item is lower than last year. We also invested in 2 programs last year, Skyward and STAR. Skyward is a student management system, and STAR is an assessment program. And the training that was given to staff when the programs were new were included in the budget last year, and then this year, there's no need for that intensity of training. I had recommended a cut to an administrator. It's elimination of the part-time administrator at Peacedale Elementary School. We also have a maintenance position. Someone in the maintenance staff retired, and we didn't replace that FTE, so there's $81,000 worth of savings there. The next piece is high school teaching salaries, but they are not affiliated with actual teaching work due to the Common Core curriculum. Mr. McCarthy and his department chairs made a commitment to having teachers teach one less section, not all teachers, 4 in the math department, 2 in social studies, 1 in English. And so now that curriculum work is completed, and so we're able to have those teachers teach a full schedule. So we've identified that's approximately $117,000 worth of savings. It's never spot on because our timeline for teachers to return from leave or teachers to make retirement decisions is well after the school committee budget and your budget is adopted. So we're fairly certain that it'll be about $117,000 from projections, but that's why at the top it clearly says estimates, because that can change. The next 2 line items are unknown to us at this time in terms of specificity, so I tried to give the school committee and the council some ideas of what that would look like. Exact FTEs and salary wouldn't be known at this time because high school students haven't completed picking their courses. At Curtis Corner Middle School, families as of last year chose their electives, which is what happens at the high school, and now that's also going to happen for grade 6 students at Broad Rock School. And so that process is far from completed, and so we anticipate that there will be section reductions. For example, Peacedale grade 2, we have 4 grade 2s now, but we have 3 grade 1s, so then they roll up. It's anticipated we'll only need 3 of that section. Broad Rock Middle School has 11 sections, 12 sections, and they usually have 10, so we believe that there's a cohort bubble there. And the exact FTEs wouldn't be known at this time, but we are certain that we are able to look to about $279,000 worth of savings there. And then the reduction of 2 non-certified staff members, and we're hopeful that folks are making some retirement decisions now, and so we're hoping that that won't impact people who are in the bargaining unit now. Perhaps that can, start as a substitute position for the remainder of this year, and then someone has not had to be laid off. So that's the entirety of the $972,670. This slide shows the property tax transfer from the town to the schools since 2005. And so I tried to sort of show you in blue, that was pre-state aid cutting, and then starting in 2010, it's a remarkable difference in the change in the economy and the motor vehicle tax and what the taxpayers have been able to afford. Green is the band that you are really speaking of when you're considering your budget. So in order to fund the school committee's request of budget, it would be 1.41% on the property tax transfer to schools. And this slide just gives you a visual. If you're more of a visual person and you want to see what it looked like for a number of years, that's been the history since 2006. And this is the history since 1996 on the state aid. And so last time we met, I showed it to you in chart format, but this is sort of giving you a sense of what's happening with the funding and how much of our budget is really now being supported by the local property owners rather than the state. Whereas our budget, and again, this is in millions, just to be clear, has remained relatively the same. And so, and that gives you from 2011 till now. And so I'm certain that you probably have questions for us.
Questions from the council?
Abel, possibly I'd like to just comment on a couple of things.
Sure.
First, I want to talk about what were the changes that I suggested that were accepted by the school committee last evening. And in the budget message that I've given the council in my budget document, I showed that on pages M25 and M26. And I just want to run over that for a moment. First, when we reviewed the revenue from the state, we suggested that the revenue from the state for next year could be increased by $40,000. That was based on the 5-year estimate that had been provided to the town in terms of education aid going forward. The difference between what the school department had and what we were reviewing was that there is a component within the education aid formula for adjustments for special education costs that are above what the state averages are. The estimate for the 15-16 year was the $40,000. So we asked that $40,000 be incorporated into the revenue that the department would anticipate receiving in the 15-16 year. Secondly, we recommended that the undesignated funds that would be assigned to the 2015-16 year stay at the $400,000 level rather than at the $345,000 level that had been originally suggested with the school department. So that provided a $55,000 increase there. We also reviewed the expenditure statement for the school fund. And let me be clear, the municipal review of the school budget, both expenditure and revenue statements, does not look at programs. If programs are recommended to have pink elephants in every school at a cost of $1 million a school, we're not going to recommend taking that out. It's program, that would be the school committee's responsibility. What we look at is that if the pink elephants could be bought for $990,000, we'd recommend that that reduction be taken. So we're not looking at program. What we're assuming is that the programs as presented by the school committee, the elected body, are the programs that need to be accounted for within the budget document. We then review the expenditures that are projected against what prior year expenses have been. This year, we recommended only one revision on the expenditure statement, and that was based on the costs that would be associated with health care for the employees within the school system. And that was based on us taking a look at the, as of February, what our cost to date had been for the year to what had been budgeted and what would be anticipated for the 15-16 year. It also took into consideration the fact that the value of funds held in the healthcare reserve were in excess of, is it $3 million, Trish? Over $3 million for the schools at this point. So there wasn't a necessity on that 155. That's where the net $250,000 reduction occurs based on those three changes that we had. So again, we're not looking at program, that's the responsibility of the committee, but we are looking at accountability. There still is flexibility in that budget, just as there is in any budget that we would review, flexibility in terms of, does it have sufficient dollars to be able to deal with unanticipated issues that may come up? Yes, it does. Our forecast would be that there's probably between $300,000 and $500,000 in cash flow capabilities within there if all the right things happened. If all the wrong things happened, they'd spend the entire amount that's there. The other thing that we looked at was the value of the undesignated fund balance, and that was on page 24. The school department is still managing a very healthy school balance for a school fund. The dollars were at $2.2 million as of June 30th of 2014. That $2.2 million will go up, even if there's no surplus this year, by about $200,000, because the $903,000 that's shown as expenditures or reserved expenditures in the 13-14 year, or for 14-15 year, only 700 of the 900 were spent. And that was for the construction activities that occurred at the high school and at the Peacedale with the roof replacement last summer. So those projects are still yet to be done, so the money's still going to be necessary, but the fund balance would increase by 200 if in fact those projects were completed and no additional work were to be done. We also have, through the capital budget process, a number of projects that the school committee wanted to accomplish that really weren't bond eligible. When I say bond eligible, I mean that they're projects such as paving, which would not last the 20 years that the repayment schedule would be. When we developed the capital improvement program last year, first year of that program, we had encumbrances on fund balance set aside for paving at the West Kingston and Curtis Corner. Those are yet to be done, and in fact, they were scheduled to be done, I think, either next year or the following year. So the balance is healthy. The programs are as they are, but we can reduce the amount by that $250,000. I did want to also look at one of the slides and just give possibly a different interpretation. When I look at this slide and it says that these are estimates needed to maintain the minimum 2%, I think I would look at it that anything that's in purple are not cuts. Those are reductions in what fundings are necessary. Certainly, if you're looking at a 4%, and I think what the school committee was asking for in this slide was to say, we could ask for 4%, but we're only going to ask for 2%. So how do we get from that 4 to that 2? If you look at that, it means that the first $370,000 are programmatic reductions based on the fact that there's less children in the charter school, there's less outside tuition that's necessary. It's not a cut. It's an adjustment to what your bottom line is that you would do in any zero-based budget. So it's not a cut from 4%, because essentially the good news is you wouldn't, with the program that has been outlined, they wouldn't have needed 4%. Same thing with the administrators, the maintenance, and the salary. The adjustments that are being suggested within the salary and benefits are still yet to be seen. Whether or not they would have needed more than that for the over the 2% is still speculation until we really see how many children are going to be and where those children are going to be as far as different sections that may not be necessary. But I don't, and I think that the superintendent was honest in her presentation this evening based on what the school committee has asked, but I want to make it clear. There isn't a $972,000 cut from the program that was recommended by the superintendent and would have needed 4%. There were a number of reductions or adjustments that anyone would take in a zero-base approach in terms of looking at next year's program. So I just want to make sure that that's fair. I think, we work hard to try to keep our relationship, open. I discussed these items with her today because I just felt the slide was somewhat misleading, but I think that her explanation was fine on it. But I did want to just address the fact that reductions are not cuts.
I'd just like to talk about the next slide, the property tax transfer from the town history. I mean, I think, you're saying that, you're indicating that we're not increasing the amount of property tax transfer is lessening percentage-wise, but we are certainly maintaining. I think that saying percentage increase in the property tax transfer, and you show it so low in 2016, it almost, when you look to the next page and you show that graph, it almost looks like we're giving so much less to the school. In reality, we are not. We're maintaining the amount we've been giving. We're lessening the amount of increase. So I think it's just how you look at these graphs, I guess. But just so the public is clear, we are maintaining our property tax transfer to the schools in light of the fact that we have a dwindling pupil population. So, I mean, with all that together, it's not like we're holding back the funds. Together, it's a formula that, besides the burden on the taxpayer, we also have less students, and accordingly, we've maintained what we've been giving, and the increase is less than what we used to give, I guess, is what you're trying to say. Back in 2006, it looked like we gave a big increase. I don't know what the reason was for that, but I don't know what the reason is for this graph to show it like this. Obviously, we have to start pulling in the reins, and we have less students. I mean,
That was not the intention of the slide. The slide is that, and I think what happens come this meeting, we have
I've never
had
seen
several...
this slide before, though,
We
Kristen.
never
I don't
made it
mean to
before.
interrupt.
So between the last time that we met with you, where a lot of the feedback that we received and a lot of the community comments were that there have been significant reductions, and where are the reductions coming from? It was an attempt at the school committee level to be able to let the public know and the school committee know that revenue on both sides is less than it was back, I'm sorry, the slide isn't there anymore, in 2009 and earlier. So the only reason I showed it to you tonight, because I tried to show you the slides that were unfamiliar to you that have been discussed at the school committee table.
But clearly, we're giving more money than we did
Yes,
back in
because
2005,
zero
6,
is
7, 8.
maintaining, right.
Okay,
So-
but, I mean, the way the slide presents itself, it almost looks like you're actually reducing what you had from previous years,
Because
which
if you
is
look
not
at
the case.
if you look at the amount column, it clearly shows that the amount every single year is going up.
Right.
And then if you look at the increase, it tells how much it's increased. The question that came from the community at our last time with you is like, what happened in 2009? And why has there been such a significant cut? And then the school committee had an obligation to speak to that research, ask us to say, why is that? And why is that is because in both areas, the state and what the taxpayers were able to do has lessened to the school committee.
Well, the taxpayer we have not wanted to go and increase what the taxpayer has to pay.
Yes.
But the taxpayer is still fully,
Absolutely.
giving as much as they ever did, if not more.
Absolutely.
So I guess I don't understand how you're putting it. I mean, they're paying.
And yes.
And they want to pay. I'm not saying
Yes.
they don't want to, but I just think it's a little misleading. We're reducing the amount. It looks like you're trying to say we're reducing the amount that the town is willing to give. That is not so. We're continually
That's
increasing.
not what we said.
It just,
All right, and I think maybe what could be done in terms of that slide is just to show what the enrollments are. Because what I just put up on the board now is showing you what the last 10 years has been. So there's been a 770 student loss in a 10-year period, or about 77 students on an annual basis. So that needs to be factored in when you look at steady state. Candidly, and we've talked about this in the past, the town has no responsibility other than a maintenance of effort with a reduction in student enrollment. We've never looked at the maintenance of effort as being the base that we want to start with, but rather as to what the programmatic needs are. But yes, we're looking at, a sizable reduction in population that's being serviced, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the reductions or adjustments that are occurring. And what we're also looking at is that the next 5 years also are anticipating on average, and this is based on the study that's done and updated each year by NESDIC, about another 317 children will be out of the system, and will be below 3,000 students in the 1920 fiscal year. And we're anticipating, based on that study, about 63 students per year additional loss. It's down from the 77, but it's also a number that is subject to a good deal of fluctuation. But, so you're going to continue to see that type of a reduction in enrollment, which will also mean that the loss of sections is not a cut of sections, but is actually a reflection of the students, so that you're having the same number of students that you had 3 years ago, but you're doing it with 2 sections rather than 3 sections. That's why I make the point about not being a reduction, but an adjustment in terms of where the cost centers are going. But, I mean, I think everybody is clear with the fact that we're going to see, enrollment changes, and that we have. I mean, when we look just at the last several years, you can see the types of changes. And if we go way back, this is a chart that would look at enrollments all the way back to the 95 year. And when you look at the top of the chart, I'll just reduce it a little bit. You can see that, we peaked out in about 2000, and then we went down from there, and we've continued to go down, and the anticipation is that there'll be, a continued reduction as we go forward. So that is going to have, that's going to have a sizable play as far as what the number of sections is going to be, the number of teachers, as well as, whether or not the structures that we have are going to have to be evaluated. That's not to suggest that just the reduction in students reduces the need for school buildings. The physical requirements really come down to how the programs are going to be structured. But yeah, I think that you can have a better reflection of what the property tax transfer history is if you had in with that chart a second equator that would show what the number of students were on a declining basis. So, but
I guess I was just trying to say, the level of commitment from the town council and the taxpayer has been, a great commitment. I mean, it's not like we're reducing. That's what I'm trying to say. I didn't want to
I think that you're inferring that from the slide, and that was not the intent. The conversations that I have had and with Mary Ann and are going from school to school in the buildings, when we're presented with the fact that, shouldn't the town council be bringing forth more money? The response that we've had is that we have a wonderful relationship, the school committee and the town council, and that we're aware that your obligation to the taxpayers includes the opportunity to do a maintenance of effort, meaning that you have the opportunity, which you've never done, to go below the 0% and take that enrollment into consideration. I've showed you the enrollment versus FTE slide at our first 2 meetings.
Right.
So I didn't feel the need to regurgitate that again for you, because I'm certain you have it in your packet. But I'm happy to include it if that is more helpful later on.
I think
what
it
I
would
wanted
be
to make
for
sure
this
is that
discussion, because
Right.
not everybody is at every meeting. I mean, we all
Exactly.
are, but the public isn't at every meeting.
That's a good
So
point.
they need to see what it is we're talking about, and, compare apples,
Right.
compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges, or however you,
usually at
make
this
that
point
comment.
in the budget process that I've been a part of, I'm bringing to you the differences in the last time that we met, the discussions that are different since we met last time. And that was the intent, not to leave any piece of information out. I had thought we already established that our enrollment is continuing to decline. And this is really the first year that folks have sort of been missing from the conversation and were unsure what had happened in all of the funding over the last few years. And clearly, when you, I think I have control back of this again. When you go to the pie chart, no. When you go to the pie chart that shows the revenue, the local taxpayers in South Kingstown are the largest revenue source by far. It's the first pie chart. So I mean, the gold represents what the contribution is of the local property tax transfer. We're almost getting to a point where we're almost solely reliant upon that, knowing that we still have 5 more years of the step down in state aid, which will even more increase the burden to the local property tax folks. I mean,
Exactly.
I testified to that in front of the General Assembly, so I'm pretty clear about that. But, you know, what I didn't think you wanted to do is relive every slide that I showed you in the last 2 meetings.
No, I don't
But
think I'm
I'll be more
suggesting that,
sensitive
but
to
when
that.
when you make a comment about, you know, how decreasing the property tax transfer over the years, I think it should be spoken of in lieu of the declining pupil population and the fact that we've maintained throughout all this,
That's fair.
plus increased, but.
Other questions from council members? Signature, go.
Yeah, I mean, another way to look at that too, though, is, you know, at a certain point, and I'm not advocating for increases of 8% or 6% or 5% at all, but in those years, I think it could be argued, and if you looked at our testing data as one point, that we saw continual student achievement improving. And so now we've really kind of seen it flatline the last few years, and to the, you know, and I think hopefully it's clear. I have sent out the information about the testing results. You know, our neighboring communities, Charahoe, Narragansett, North Kingstown, Exeter, West Greenwich, in terms of the testing, are going past us. So it's not like everybody's flatlining and we're all in the same situation. So we're flatlining, and the other districts right in our area are going past us. So a concern could be that maybe with this low rate of increase, even though it is an increase, and I'm not saying that the taxpayers aren't committed, but I think it's an important thing to think about, that maybe with the lesser increases, it's catching up to us in terms of, you know, our learning environment and learning outcomes with our children.
Sure. Scott?
I guess that the truth is that we look at the numbers in terms of student outcomes, and it's very hard to figure out exactly what drives that. What is probably the truest statement is there is no one thing that drives that. If there was, it would be addressed, and it's a multivariate driving process. I want to go back to Steve's comment, because I do think that it's really important. The school committee is charged with defining a program. We come to you with what's the program that we feel will respond to the student achievement needs of children in the community. And I mean, I've been around for a long time. My experience is that while the conversations are often lively, the town council has supported the program that the school committee has brought. And we are moving through that same process again. We brought you a program, assuming, without regard to the adjustments that Steve and his staff identify, because those are not program adjustments. Those are budgetary adjustments without regard to program. But it's my hope that we will end up having recommended a program that you feel comfortable in funding. My view, I guess, is if there is more money needed for a program, it's on us to come and say that to you. It's not on you to say, geez, you didn't ask for enough money. Our responsibility is to figure out what the programs are that the children need, and to make that argument to you. And when we reach a point of disagreement, talk that through. So I don't have a concern about the role taken on by the town council. I think that we've asked for money and we've gotten the money. Has there been a decline in funding? There has not. Has there been a decline in the rate of increase? Yes, there has. And one big old ugly recession will do that to you. And reductions in enrollment will do that. I mean, it doesn't cut our need for funding on a dollar-for-dollar basis. We still have to maintain an infrastructure and that kind of thing, but it makes a difference in terms of what our costs are. So I guess I think that the point Jonathan makes is a fair point. I think it's a point that ought to be at our table before it's at your table. That's part of the challenge of being an elected official, is trying to figure out what is it that is needed, and then can we figure out how to make that happen.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate those comments very much. I think they speak to what I see. I think the school committee has been very responsive to the taxpayers in recent years. That's what that chart shows me. I think when I speak to council members around the state, they are incredulous when I tell them how little our school committee asks of us in the town. I would say, was there, I understand that the $250,000 in savings is all budgetary reduction, doesn't have anything to do with a diminishing program for the students that we have. But was there any consideration given to seeing that savings and maybe spending it on some of the other concerns that we've heard about through this process? The loss of a school counselor at Curtis Corner, or somebody to plug that Wednesday gap for social workers at Curtis Corner? Because it seems like those dollars might be available to plug those needs, and it sounded like those needs are out there.
So we did talk about that a little bit last night as a school committee, and what we talked about at the table, most of us agreed that those kinds of decisions can't be based on, there are, I think Mr. Borhaven talked about librarians. There are many things that are relayed to us anecdotally, and we need to make decisions based on data. So that we decided that conversation couldn't happen quickly enough, or that data couldn't be gathered quickly enough in order to use those dollars at this time.
Are there ways we can gather that data then, or how are we going to progress there? So it's a problem of not having the data to justify or to understand what our particular needs might be in terms of, I mean, essentially I'm thinking of special ed and impoverished students, that gap in achievement that does not look pretty in our school system.
I guess as one of the members of the school committee, my view of that is we've had concerns, I think legitimate concerns, raised by individuals. We have a responsibility to go look at that. I've urged that we look at that comprehensively, that we not try to fix one little place, but that we look broadly at the mental health needs of our children and families, and that we look at our staffing pattern, and we look in an evidence-based way at those concerns and drive budget out of not anecdotal data, but out of that more comprehensive look. My own view of that is that I think it gets dangerous when you respond to an individual or several individuals who say, here's a problem. So I would prefer that more comprehensive look. For me, that's on a timeline because of where we are in the budget cycle, that we would end up talking in between budget cycles about what the data is looking like. I think that that's something the town council ought to be involved in terms of discussion. And the completion of that kind of comprehensive look would be something that would impact the next budget cycle, because it's really, I think some of the questions, not all of them, but some of the questions are staffing pattern. So what is it that we need to do in order to respond to that? And are there concerns that are not staffing that contribute to that process? I guess I would be more comfortable being sure that we really understand the problem before we try to fix it.
I totally agree, and I think you want to go through a good process of identifying needs. But I think there are some anecdotes which bear some weight. I mean, it's not anecdotal that on Wednesday there is no social worker there for Curtis Corner Kids, and I think it's pretty absurd to suggest that just on Wednesdays kids aren't going to have need of that service. Similarly, with the guidance counselor, there's more than 500 students at that school. So that's, that's a lot of students for one guidance counselor to be overseeing. So those two things struck out at me. Even though it's anecdotal, I think there's pretty solid evidence that Wednesdays aren't a day free of troubles, and that 500 students is a lot to look at. But I do think, I agree, Scott, that what we need is a process that identifies these things. I just want to be sure that that process is going to happen.
I don't disagree that with the coverage issue on Wednesday. It would be inappropriate for me to presume that I will wave a wand and make that better, that we have administrators for that. But I would say that coverage is not always addressed by hiring people. We have resources, and the question is how to utilize those resources. And I get concerned about referencing caseload number off of the professional advocacy organization for a profession, and the social work profession does the same thing. We say what the caseload ought to be, and that might be a little self-serving. I think that the question isn't what does a national organization say. I think the question is really, let's look at what the workload is of the people who are working in the district. If there is too much demand for their service, not on a head count, but on a service recipient count, then we need to respond to that. I don't think we have that data, but I think it's an absolutely appropriate question to ask, and that we ought to get that data.
Raisa.
The other thing is, I think it's important to realize that not everybody who has concerns comes and speaks at the microphone. And I think Scott started to speak to this a little bit. We have our staff in the buildings who may say that we don't have enough teacher aides. We don't have, so we need to have enough time and a process established so that everybody has a voice, and then we look at different data points to figure out what we need to do. He also said, and we can't say this for certain, but that social worker issue on a Wednesday morning can be addressed with the staff that we already have. And so adding dollars to the budget to hire personnel may not necessarily be the solution to that problem.
I mean, I've tried to look at the distribution of social workers since I am a social worker. I do think we're tight. I tend not to approach that question in terms of how many social workers there are. Social workers are one part of a supportive counseling mental health team, and we have other people, but I think it's a tight distribution. So I don't want to minimize the fact that our resources are tight. I just before we start adding staff, I think we ought to know what the dimensions of the problem are.
No, if I could, without trying to increase this budget, I think some of the frustration for us has been looking at these new programs while hearing of the holes that are within the schools, the librarian, the aides, the social workers. You know, when I hear you say we maybe can get coverage for the social worker at Curtis Corner on a Wednesday, I'm, in my mind, going, well, now who's going to be without one? Because by taking that social worker and putting them at the Curtis Corner, now they're not somewhere else. So it's just, you know, frustrating for us to be hearing a lot of concern from the community about the lack of these support positions and have that not been in the budget.
Okay, I guess I'll say at this point, and I'm sure you all know this, the ball at this point is in your court. So if you want to add $250,000 to the budget, I'm sure we'll...
No, I mean, I certainly don't want to add any more, but, you know, that I think was the discussion last time, where I'm certainly not opposed to dual language immersion. I just see it as a very expensive program. I'm not opposed to the laptop initiative, but again, that's an expensive program, both of which could be very expensive going forward. And, you know, to bring those two potentially very expensive programs into this budget without the aid positions that we're lacking, I just, it's frustrating.
I have to agree with her on that. I mean, we're talking about the dual language immersion project. We're not, where does this bring us in the future? What's next year going to bring? Do we need, I mean, we're talking about 2 new kindergarten teachers this year. And I know we can't tell you how to spend the money. I'm fully aware of the statutory limitations on what we have here, but we certainly have an obligation to inquire. I'm looking at the kindergarten teachers that we have now. I mean, we're talking about 2 of them will be laid off to bring in 2 bilingual teachers. How can you say no? You already have them? You're going to add 2 kindergarten classes?
There's a dual language immersion committee that's been meeting at first every 2 weeks and now every 3 to 4 weeks that has been planning out the rollout of what this will look like. In some school departments, they do exactly what you said. Rhode Island school departments that partner in some grant efforts with us, they would be laying off 2 kindergarten teachers that presently work in the schools and bringing on board 2 kindergarten teachers who have dual language certification. We presently do not have staff that have dual language
Right.
certification. And so we could do that. That was not the recommendation of the committee. The recommendation of the committee to the school committee was that this is worthwhile, a worthwhile program that will give our children competencies to be able to compete in a global learning and working environment when they graduate from high school. And so how can we do that year 1, the first time trying it, and ensure some confidence in our current teaching staff? We only have 2 or 3 of our current
So the plan is to have 2 classrooms every year, so kindergarten, first grade, all the way up to 12th grade? Is that where you plan to go with this?
All the way up to fifth grade.
5th?
Once, in our structure currently, and certainly your conversation about reconfiguration may change those projections in the future, but our structure currently, we team in sixth grade. And
Right.
so what it looks like is these students will become fluent in Spanish early in their elementary career. They will continue cohort, there are cohort survival mechanisms through second grade. And second through fifth grade, the cohort stays intact. And then when they get to sixth grade, a part of a 4-person teaming structure, one of those members of the team, whichever member of the team would have that dual language certification. So among 3 sixth grade teams of 4 teachers each, one needs that certification because they're picking up 4 cohorts of kids. They're only going to be doing Spanish with 2 of those 4 cohorts.
So Kristen, you're starting off with 44, 2 classrooms, 22 in each classroom, that's what I was reading in the blue book you gave us. So it'd be 2 classrooms, 22 in each, and half the day in Spanish, half the day in English. What happens in the next year if some of them drop out? So now you've got even smaller classrooms? Can you pick up new students? How can you do this?
So, in talking to our partner, the International Charter School in Pawtucket, children are not fully fluent until they go into the second grade year. So it would be really difficult for an only English-speaking student to join the cohort at that time. Having said that, we certainly have ESL students in our district, and particularly at West Kingston Elementary School, where one of the sites is being located, who are Spanish speakers naturally. And so for them, it would be a natural environment in the Spanish half day, and it would be a learning environment in the English half day. And so from second to fifth grade, you could pick up a Spanish-speaking youngster. In first grade, and the summer of before second grade, then we would give them like a primer ramp-up to make certain that they had some of the basic skills in language. And certainly the structures that they've acquired in English language acquisition will be able to make that translation into Spanish language acquisition easier. When you're literate in your own language, it makes it easier. So, but yes, that's how it would go.
And how do you go about choosing these students? A lottery? No
Yes.
testing involved?
No testing involved. If you, at the school committee meeting last evening, I went through an entire description of what's happened in the dual language process between the last time that we met and now. If you'd like me to go through it, I can.
No, that's okay.
If you have a lottery question, I can go there.
No, that's all right.
So we planned 4 parent outreach sessions, 1 at each elementary school. Any parent in the district with an entering kindergartner can attend. There are brochures that have been created and put on e-board and will be distributed at kindergarten registration. The committee felt that one Saturday, one evening, one early morning, and a after-school program, and the principals of the elementary schools decided which scenario fit their educational community best. We're going to give a 45-minute explanation to parents. There are parents that have been following this very closely and
Oh, I'm sure.
emailing and saying, when is it? So we've made determinations that the lottery is going to be a lottery, a blind score. So the child outreach data will tell us the cohort that we're expecting from, let's say, Mattoonic and West Kingston. And if 60% of the kiddos in that cohort live in West Kingston, then 60% of the lottery draw from the 44 or 46 students will be West Kingston students. So the only way that we would know is that the top of their forms
Scott wanted to say something? Scott? Up.
It's helpful. I just want to add that I think an important question that we have to consider on the school board as we address the success of all learners in the community, in all cohorts, is, if the school district does not pursue innovation, then are we communicating to a cohort of families in this town that we value coasting and maintaining over, raising continual learners through excellence? And if we do that, are we then feeding flight to charter schools and feeding into a two-tiered public education system?
So the comment was offered before about bringing 2 initiatives into this budget. And I wanted to share that from my perspective on the school committee, we're not. We're bringing 1 initiative into this budget. We're continuing an initiative that we briefed the town council on last year. We spent more than $600,000 last year on the computer initiative, and that was a long-range plan to continue every year. So I wanted to just offer a comment about the computer initiative and to create a separation between the continuation of the computerization initiative and the dual immersion language program. When I think about public education in South Kingstown, I think about South Kingstown offering among the best public education opportunities in the state. Our goal ought to be the best. When you look at what is happening across the state in terms of distribution and increased access of students to computers, we are, and the data is not crystal clear, but we're at the 13th or the 14th district into this. That's not my view of South Kingstown public education. We're in the middle of the pack. We're really good average. I really think that we ought to be at the top of that list. And so when I think about the computer initiative, I frankly am seeing us doing a little bit of catching up, because our place ought to be in the top 3, really ideally the top 1, not 13, not 14. So the dollars associated, which I understand in a budgetary process, there are new expenses, and there will be every year. Those grow out of a decision that started 2 years ago, that involved the town council last year, and at that time we knew this was going to be a continuing budget item. It would have made no sense to spend the money in the first year and then not spend the money in the second, and that's not what South Kingstown ought to be about in terms of public education.
Joe?
I don't have any questions, I just have a couple comments. I appreciate the explanation, Scott. I wasn't at this table last year, so I appreciate that. I do question, as others here have, the fiscal soundness of adding, and I understand one is an ongoing program, but adding these expenses in these trying economic times, our taxpayers are easily into year 7 of an economic downturn, and some people are doing okay, but a lot of people aren't. And it's, I think one comment that I've heard from the neighborhood is, well, it's $100 or it's $150 more, but it's more. So if your tax bill is $6,000, it's $150 more. So just understand that your charge is different, and obviously ours is, but I think our taxpayers are challenged now to pay the $6,000, if that's the number, and we're asking them to pay $100 or $200 more. So those are my comments. Thank you.
So I want to round out my comment from earlier, and, I agree when, our school committee members are saying that the town is doing a good job. I agree with that. The town definitely has lived up to its end of the bargain, and the taxpayers have definitely ended up, are living up to their end of the bargain. So I really don't think, that's the issue. I've said this before, and I think the failure is in the school department. If we're not doing as well as we should, it's not because you've said, no, you asked for this much money, and we're going to give you less. It's really on the school committee to come forward and say, well, this is what we need. And it doesn't mean that it has to be more. But, if you're going to flatline salaries, as an example, because that's, there's a certain amount of budget increase just to roll the same program forward, unless you're going to flatline salaries. And over time, if that occurs, you're going to lose your best talent. We've talked about that if you don't offer a good salary, then you're not going to get the best talent. So, I get, and I think it is important. So, just for disclosure and for public conversation, this was the conversation we had at the school committee last night. I made a motion, not that I didn't agree with Mr. Alfred's amendments, because he knows more about this than I do, certainly, and so it looks logical, and he's done all his due diligence, so I agree with that. But I made a motion to not accept the amendments because I wanted the school committee to be able to, still take his advice and make that move on those 3 items, but then to have that money and for us to be able to decide how can we reallocate that if we need to reallocate that. So in advance of the meeting, last night, I sent an email and I asked the superintendent to look at, and I sent it to the superintendent and the chair, to look at what positions have had the largest negative impact upon children's learning environment in South Kingstown. And, that conversation didn't want to happen at that table. And I think the foundation is being set. It's not all doom and gloom. I think that the conversation last night is being set to have the conversation moving forward. But really what that's saying is that we've cut 100 positions. Some of it is because of declining enrollment, but some of it is based on budget. So the ones that are based on budget, that's having a negative impact on children's learning, that maybe we don't have to make that choice. We should have that conversation. So I really wanted to know what those positions would be to have reinstated, and based upon the fact that we have all this data, this is 100 positions virtually over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, well, what are the ones? Because I have to believe that the superintendent knows what those positions are, because if she doesn't, then that leads to an idea of a bigger problem.
Rachel, do you have something to say?
You can go. You can go.
Oh, I'll wait. Go ahead, Rachel.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's really pushing my thinking. And the feedback I want to provide is to identify that these programs we're suggesting have been part of a process. And that process is deliberative. It takes a long time. So while they may be new to you and fresh to your eyes, I want to point out that there was a lot of work for a long time. A lot of hours were put into these programs. So they weren't thrown together. And I'm not suggesting anyone is thinking that they were thrown together ad hoc. But I'm trying to point out that there is a process that takes place, and it's slow, and it's arduous, and it's thorough, such that when a suggestion is made that this has pedagogy behind it, there's been a lot of research behind it. And to turn that around, if we were to step forward and say, we've heard people suggest that we need to have this position put in for a Wednesday morning social worker. That's a great idea, but it needs to go through that process that I'm referring to. And as an elected official, speaking only for myself, I wouldn't be comfortable going to my fellow townfolk and saying, we heard that this was a need, so we went ahead and did it. And there needs to be good, sound evidence to support moving forward. And I'm not suggesting in any way that these witnessings aren't real or shouldn't be addressed, but they need to be addressed within the process and the protocol that's set up, such that when we do come to a solution, we can responsibly go to our townfolk and say, we heard this concern, we investigated it, we identified some solutions, we identified some ways to address them, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted that to be part of this conversation. That, and me personally, as someone who's been witnessing this for a lot of years, it was really mind-blowing how slow this takes place. And I understand now why it's that. It's not that it's going slow, it's just that that's the way it goes. And that speeding it up, I don't know that it has a value. So I wanted that to be part of the conversation. And what I haven't heard as far as the tax transfers and looking at them historically was there was a point, I guess it was 2009, when Commissioner Gist came down here, and there were plenty of people in this room were in the room when Gist was here, and she said, and I'm paraphrasing her, they did a report identifying all the property in Rhode Island and what taxes were associated with them and who's taxing at an appropriate level and who's taxing too low. This is her. I'm not saying this. I'm telling you what she said. SK didn't tax their property the way other folks in the state are taxing their property. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying that's what she identified, and that's how we became such a large loser in the funding formula. She said, well, you're not taxing your property enough. I'm not suggesting she's right. I'm suggesting that's how we got to this funding formula to where we are asking for more taxes. And I'm saying that in the context of this was brought to all of us. Nobody said cut the funding formula, make SK the biggest loser. But this was brought to us, and I think just to make sure that we're looking at it with all the perspective that we can, I think it needs to be understood that this was brought to us, and it was identified by some research, some report that she did, that SK wasn't taxing our property enough. I'm not saying that. I'm totally down with my tax rate. I'm not looking for it to go up. But I'm just saying this was brought to all of us. Thank you. Oh, one more comment. And I just wanted to correct, at least identify, Scott said he'd like us to be the best in the state. Personally, I'd like us to be the best in Massachusetts.
Hold on one second. Rachel was first in line here.
Going back to what Scott had said was, you know, we're really only bringing one new programming, which is all the more reason for me to really hash out the discussion about that. If the laptop initiative is being presented as this was discussed at the last budget season, and therefore this is following up, when we first met and I was asking questions about the dual language immersion, that's, I guess, the reason. Because if we sit here next year at a budget season and there is an additional expense to that program, it will be called a commitment at that point. So this is our opportunity to really think about the cost of that program going forward. Because the cost of that program going forward initially will be the kindergarten teachers and an administrator, if I'm correct. So I just think that it could potentially be an expensive program going forward, and I would hate to be sitting here next year saying, well, that's not a new program, we have a commitment to that. This appears to be the only time we have to really look at that. And I'm not against the program itself. I see the merit in it. And I'm sure you all have looked into the logistics of how it would run, but from a cost perspective, I just envision this as a very potential expensive program.
And I think that this is the conversation that ought to take place. And while we end up deciding where the money goes, we have a shared collective responsibility to the taxpayers about those decisions. And that's really why I offered the comments that I did about the computer program, because that is now an ongoing expense. We shouldn't have spent the money in the first year if we weren't going to spend it in the second. This is an important program. I support the program. I think it would, in this instance, South Kingstown would be first. Everybody would be chasing us, and the educational outcomes, I think, are impressive. But the conversation ought to be had. I absolutely agree with you. I don't object to the questions. I think that is your due diligence here.
Thank you.
You had a question, Carol?
You know, Scott and Myrna, Jonathan, all of you have had great comments. Keith, I think we're aware of the process. We do the same thing on different issues here. And we appreciate how much time and energy everybody puts into this. And I am confident that you know how to handle especially these new programs. And again, it's just a matter of, you know, we have to worry about the dollars and cents. Some of these programs can come and go. We've all seen them. You know, over the years, there was the first, second grade, yes, Kaleidoscope program. I mean, there's programs that come and go over the years. Will this be another one of those? I don't know. I hope not. I think it's a great idea. And I think that, you know, we do want to have great initiatives and move forward and all of that. And excellence in education, I think this town has made a great commitment towards that. The town council, the school committee, the taxpayer, so everybody's on board. But we do have to take in the reality of times, like Joe said, you know, the difficult economic times. That's what we have to worry about. What's the best bang for our buck? That's what we have to get. You know, and we have to keep trying to find that, however it is, and get the best test scores. I mean, obviously, that's what we'd all like to see. You know, a thriving educational community with everybody has got great futures ahead of them, and I mean, I can't say any more, and I'm very confident that you guys have done a great job, but we have to ask the questions. I know you've talked about it 100 times by now, and this is one more time you have to talk about it again. But as far as the computer program, I just have to say one more thing on that. We did give the money last year, being the person, Meg was here too. It was supposed to go to all half the ninth grade students, I guess. It didn't happen that way. That was supposed to be the test case. Now we're giving it to ninth and 10th graders. You know, we don't have a test. So we're just going forward. I mean, technology is such that I agree that it's got to be part of the program. I do wish that half the ninth graders had gotten them last year, so you'd be sitting here telling us what a great success it was, but we don't have the luxury of that at this point. So I hope that the money gets spent where you say it's going to go this time, and when you come back next year, you can tell us what a great program the computer program, you know, the laptop program was, and the language immersion program. I mean, let's just do it this time. I know things change, but anyway, go ahead, Rachel.
We have a couple of conversations going, and I just wanted to say before, if it comes back to this, that part of the process for looking at perhaps if we were going to add staff back, we talked about last night, and we didn't say tonight, that we are going to talk further about having a special education task force and start looking at some of those things. So while you say social work, it may mean we need 2 more special educators. It may mean we have enough special educators, but they're not in the right buildings at the right time. It may mean we have enough social workers, but they're not in the right buildings at the right time, because as Scott said, there are many tiers to the mental health support and the special education services that we provide. So that thoughtful deliberation cannot happen in 4 days. Our superintendent is extremely talented. That would take superpowers.
Thank you, that's very encouraging to hear. I wanted to clarify a couple things on the presentation. Just for people at home, really, I think I know what's in it, but when you look at the expenditures, and there's $7,183,829 for other, as the third largest outlay there. Could you give us a little more detail of what's included under other?
Expenditures under other.
Included in that particular line item, the bulk of that $7.1 million, is transportation, which is $3.9 million. It also includes property and liability insurance. It includes our special ed tuition, which is $1.2 million. And then you have another $1.1 million, which is charter schools, and another $546,000, which is our vocational education schools. So those four numbers pretty much add up to the $7.1 million.
It's on the last page of the document that I gave you, which was their expenditure statement.
The other, and really that's just for information, I'm not questioning any of the dollars in there. The other thing, in terms of the reductions in this budget, when it says non-certified, 60,000, reduction of approximately 2 full-time employees, who are those people?
Those would be members of the ESP bargaining unit. So it could be clerical, it could be teacher assistant support.
The only question I had is, I know this dual immersion, the language program, will be done by a lottery system. How many children do you anticipate will qualify for this versus potentially, you're saying 44 people, children, excuse me, based on the lottery will enter this, but how many children really qualify for this?
So every kindergartner entering would qualify to enter the lottery.
And how many kindergartners, what's a typical kindergarten?
200 to 300. And so the child outreach data from last year, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to try to remember it, 1/3 of the youngsters who reside in South Kingstown were not entering South Kingstown kindergartens. And so, where are they? They're either choosing to go to the CDC or private preschools, private kindergartens. Now the CDC has discontinued kindergarten. There are also, they homeschool, they are paying for outside tuitions, they hold them back. There's a lot of different explanations, but the feedback that we received at the community conversation, and I'm forgetting where you came in if we met with you since then, but if we haven't, a majority of the parents who expressed interest and who have been communicating to myself and our program staff would be choosing private school, would be choosing charter school. Certainly some of our own families would like to come. Those are the folks who have been coming and saying, why aren't you doing this in first grade as well? Why aren't you doing this up to 5th grade? Everyone knows this is the right thing to do. Why aren't you doing it? And we're saying, thank you. That would be just great. But kindergarten is a big piece, and we're going to tackle that first. So we believe we're going to have a good response rate, but we really won't know until we offer the opportunity to families.
So the families that choose to participate in this, just for clarification, they're responsible for transportation themselves?
Only if they don't already reside in the Peacedale or in the West Kingston area. And so that came up as a long conversation at the DLI committee. And that's one of the reasons that we selected those 2 schools to pilot the program in. If we'd piloted it in all 4 schools, and it really wouldn't be a pilot anymore, we're not certain we would have that threshold of interest. And particularly at, let's say, Matunic, where there are only 2 sessions, there would not be an English-only track. If a parent didn't want to exercise dual language, they'd sort of be forced into it, and that wasn't the intent.
Right. I know the numbers in Matunic are so low. If you pull more students from that school, how is that going to affect?
It could bring them down to 1 of every grade level.
Okay. And that school can maintain with that few students? Okay.
I mean, our overall goal and our overall feedback is that we'd like to recapture the youngsters who live in town who now are not choosing to come here. And so if we're able to do that, and we're seeing a significant draw to this program, then there have been parents from Wakefield and Matunic who have said, we'd like to see it in our program. We've had teachers in Wakefield and Matunic saying, I really would be interested in teaching with a partner, a Spanish partner, but I don't want to leave my school. And so there is an opportunity for this program to grow going forward.
So then I go back to my original concern with this could potentially be a very expensive program. If you're looking at, if the best case scenario would be that this is a success and we want to have it in all the schools, then wouldn't we have to have these Spanish-speaking certified teachers in all of our schools?
Or Mandarin or Italian or Portuguese, yes. But then we'd have sufficient enrollment for those students.
And do you think we would then have enough staff that's naturally retiring to fill those positions?
No, not if we went, that's why we're not doing it right now. We don't have enough staff to do a complete full
No, I'm
flip
saying
over.
going forward, as if it is a success, and then we want to put this at all the schools. Right now, you're saying it would be a natural, we have 2 to 4 teachers retiring, so then we replace them with the Spanish certified teachers. If this was at every school, I don't think we'd have that many people retiring each year to fill those spots.
So what would happen is, I'm assuming we're defining success as an
Yes.
increase in overall enrollment. So when those students increase in the overall enrollment, then they're going to need teachers regardless if they're English-speaking teachers or if they're Spanish or Portuguese-speaking teachers. So a successful program that we would monitor for more than a year. I mean, really a trend is seen in about 3 years. I can't predict how popular it will be and how much the other schools may or may not advocate to have the program at their doorstep. But we believe families will move here. We've already heard from families who are looking for property in town and are saying it was approved, right? And
I think it's something that people really either love or don't want at all. I've talked to people that are one or the other. People run very hot and cold about this program. One of the concerns I've heard, and I think could limit the lottery in the beginning, is the people with older siblings. If they
True.
have siblings already at Matunic, they're not going to be driving a kid to Peacedale and putting another kid on the bus to Matunic. So some families that might, if it were their first child, only child, be interested, I'm concerned that they might not be jumping on because of that.
Sure. We do have about 15 to 30 families, or students, not necessarily families, a year who just naturally ask to be in a different location. And so they provide their own transportation. It's more convenient, let's say, for daycare. It's more convenient for where they work. They might work in town, and then they want their child to attend Wakefield, and they live in West Kingston, let's say. So we have that and have had that for years. And so we ask them to fill out a request. They do so, and we honor every single one that we possibly can on a space available basis. We would absolutely let parents know that. I mean, it certainly, I have children. I know once you have put your little one in a school, that becomes your home school. But if they wanted to put both siblings together in a school, that would be an option for them. But it would mean transferring the older sibling.
Right, and I guess that's a little bit of my concern. I know the numbers are so low at Matunic as it is. If you started pulling kids from the upper grades as well as the kindergarten, you're going to potentially see,
An imbalance.
yeah, an imbalance in those.
We've discussed that in detail at our meetings. Yes.
So then we go back to like a reconfiguration issue, I suppose, eventually, if it happens that way.
Well, we actually started talking about the reconfiguration request last evening. And so I think, based on the conversation at the school committee table last night, we're going to be talking about that regardless. But it would be another variable in that discussion. We would be unable to predict what that would look like today. We've been very cautious to not respond to the families until after the school committee approved the budget. But yes, I think that would be a variable that we're going to continue to watch.
Jonathan?
All right, so I think the school committee some of the time has, in interest of not being involved in operation, which I think is a right thought process, hasn't always been great with evaluation. And I think one piece that speaks to that is we don't really know why people choose to not send our children to South Kingstown schools. And so I'm bringing that up tonight because I think there's a number of things we need to do better evaluating, such as our existing programs, as well as these new programs that we're bringing forward. Because I think that might make town council and taxpayers feel more comfortable with, seeing the proof of the outcome of the programs. But we talk about enrollment, but we don't really know why people choose to not send their children to South Kingstown schools. They're opting out because there is not enough support, which is part of what we're talking about tonight. Is it the testing? Is that why they're opting out? How the learning environment plays out. So I'm just voicing that, and maybe some of my fellow office holders on the school committee would prefer just to have this conversation in school committee and keep it nice and neat. But I think if I don't bring it out here, if you don't notice, a lot of the votes are 6-1. So if I don't bring it out here and share it with the town council people and the taxpayers, then, then the 6-1 ends up being, hey, everything's fine, and there's just one guy that we don't know what he doesn't like. So I think it's important to have the conversation. And then and I don't know if Mr. Alford's going to touch on this or not, but, it is in the town charter, and I'm not really expecting that this would happen, but it is an option. I'm not going to read this to you, but the town charter, section 4222A, that the town council does have the right to add money into the budget. So I think that's something that maybe you can consider. I don't really expect it, like I say, but it is an option. And then I guess if there are people in the community who feel strongly that whether it's 250,000 or whatever number, there is a process that I think people should be aware of that they can follow to request money be added back in. It's actually about 6 weeks to. I think the budget will be passed on March 16th. I'm not quite sure on that. What is it? Okay. Right. And then at that point, people can collect 25 signatures and petition to have money added in or money taken out. And then beyond that, and somebody can explain the process better than I can, but then there could be a referendum. And everybody gets scared about a referendum. But sometimes, maybe every so many years, a referendum's a good idea. And let the people vote on, do they want to cut? Do they like it is? Do they want to add? Because then it really kind of takes elected officials off the hook, because it's really the community members that would make that decision.
Chris?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Mr. Daley LaBelle shared regarding surveying folks who were electing to go elsewhere. Last evening at the school committee meeting, Assistant Superintendent Lisi reported out to the school committee, and I didn't hear that reflected in Mr. LaBelle's comment, that we've already gotten started on that process. We have some social worker interns from Rhode Island College that have been working with our wonderful social workers and the Washington County Coalition for Children. One of the details that they're working on is chronic absenteeism, and the other is that they have developed a survey and are starting that outreach to families to find out what are those, factors that that are causing families to not send their children to public school. And the research and expertise that was shared among their group is that instead of right away with the first step, looking at every single choice like homeschool and charter school, and I'm going to hold my student back for a year. In my athletic family, we call that redshirting. It's a technique that didn't really occur to me as useful till my children were in high school. And then also, charter schools and private, I think I said that already. So they're going to start with the charter school question, and they've developed a survey, a statistically significant survey that will be able to elicit some of the details so that we can learn from that. I think that's something that was brought up at this table very early in our budget conversation, so I just wanted to assure you that that's happening.
I think that's great. I think that will be very helpful in the future. I really do. Knowing why people are making the other choices may surprise you, and I think that's great. I really appreciate that you're going forward with that.
What I didn't hear reflected in Mr. Daley LaBelle's comments is that we spoke last night as a council, a committee, of how much we value the collaboration with the town council, and that it's collaborative, and we want to respect that process with you, right? And personally, I'm not looking for us to cost the town a referendum, right?
I'd just like to respond to Keith. I want to clarify that you didn't say this. Somebody said that South Kingstown doesn't tax their taxpayers enough. According to taxfoundation.org, Washington County ranks in the top 4% in the country in communities that have 20,000 residents or more. Out of 1,833 counties, we came in number 66. So whoever said it, I don't think it's on target.
Steve, maybe you can answer this. I think there were a number of things that went into that decision that why we lost the state aid. I don't think it was just the taxing ability and the desire here. I think it was the achievement of the children, the education that we were providing, the cost we were paying per pupil. I think there were several issues that went into that. And our overall achievement, I can remember saying to Commissioner Gist, if you're taking money away from the overachieving communities like ourselves, but you're telling us we can do it anyway because we're already doing it, then aren't you saying once we have less money that we will underachieve and we're going to become a society of mediocrity like the entire state? I can remember having this conversation. So it was way more put into that. There was a lot more consideration put into that statement than just, did we tax enough? And I think, Steve, you remember all of these things. Maybe you can speak to that.
The formula takes into consideration a lot of different things. But one of the things that the formula really hurt us with is that the first year of the formula was the year that we had the highest tax roll before the revaluations. We were up at about, I think it was about $5.2 billion in taxable value. But the other problem is that, or issue is that it also looks at what the median family income is. Median family income in South Kingstown is 130% of what the average is in the state. So we're penalized for that. We're penalized for the size of the tax base. The tax base that's being used in the 16 year goes back to December 31st of 2011. Actually, it'll be 2012. It'll be the first year that we'll be seeing the changes in the revaluations. We went from about 5.2 down to 4.1 billion. So there's a lot of differences that are there. The other thing it looks at is the number of children that qualify for free or reduced lunch. We have a low percentage of that. I think it was around between 16 and 21%. So all of those factors come into play. And I think that what Commissioner Gist was saying is that we are taxing at a lower effort than the cities are. That's where the formula was driven. But it was driven to be able to provide emphasis for school systems with a higher degree of children in need and a higher degree of those communities that had less of a tax base. The fact that the city of Providence may exempt from taxation 60% of their taxable property comes into play in the formula. They may not be taxing. The question may be that the tax effort is very high on the taxable values that are there, but very low if you looked across all of the properties. The formula tried to use a broad brush to come up with a better education formula, but the formula has a good deal of flaws in it. It always has. The fact that Barrington is still gaining state aid under the formula makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but it does. So now we can complain about the formula. We went through it at the time. I reviewed each of the different communities and how the impacts work differently. It just depended on a snapshot in time, and from there, the adjustments are going to be made. The other thing it does, and that needs to be recognized, is that the value of state aid isn't just the $350,000 or so that you lose a year. It's also what's going to be lost in the number of students. If you're losing 50 or 60, 70 students a year, and you're losing the aid per student on that does have a major impact on our system. So yes, the formula really is to the disadvantage of South Kingstown, and what they're attempting to do is really, our conclusion was it develops mediocrity, because it's taking those that are overperforming and those that are underperforming and trying to get them to a midpoint. And formulas only work if the foundation for the formulas are the same in every community, and they're not. So.
Scott had something.
Two other things. I mean, Steve really did a wonderful analysis at the time that the state aid formula came out. And we have to recognize the state of Rhode Island was the last state in the country to come up with a state aid formula. Up until then, it was kind of a Russian roulette. Wait until you get the right number of votes in the General Assembly, and that's the right amount of aid. So it's a little embarrassing that we ended up being the last in the country, following Alabama and Mississippi and states that normally are not leading the pack. One of the flaws is that we have the largest footprint of a non-joined district, and the professor at Brown who put together the formula opted not to include transportation costs. So we have several $1 million every year that is taken off the table. The other piece of this that really hasn't been talked much about is whenever you do this kind of formularizing, you start with some premises. And one of the premises that Commissioner just started with was we don't need any more education dollars. We're funding education perfectly well. The problem is only the distribution of the dollars. And we ended up without much conversation about that premise. It was just that, a premise. And it was a postulate offered, and the funding formula was driven out of that belief, largely because the state was in such poor financial shape that it couldn't identify where additional revenue would come from. That's a different statement. We can't figure out where there's more money, rather than we don't need any more to address the needs of the communities where public education is most failing. Once you identify that you're in a zero-sum environment, then the only place you're going to get the money is taking it away from communities that have more, in order to give it to communities that have less in terms of taxing ability. I really think that, while I'm concerned about the flaw about transportation, the biggest flaw is that there was not a bigger debate about whether we have enough money on the table to support public education. Given the outcomes in the state of Rhode Island, while I'm cautious about putting money and assuming that that fixes all problems, clearly there are communities that struggle with the adequacy of resources.
Kristen?
I just wanted to briefly add to the manager's statement that one piece is the loss of state aid in the per-student formula that comes to us, but then that gets exacerbated to go out to a tuition. So we lose the revenue that would be coming in if the student attended our school, and then we're charged a larger amount in terms of a tuition to a charter school or to the vocational center, and that gets really, really difficult.
Are there any other? Nope. All right.
Thank you, Meg. I appreciate that. Actually, I would like to build on some of the comments that's been made at the table here. Myrna's comment about the collaboration with the town council. So we've experienced that kind of collaborative spirit over the past couple of years, and I'm actually, I'm very thrilled to see that we can continue that conversation. Many of the questions that you raised tonight and many of the questions that you raised previously, we took very seriously, and we went back to the school committee, and we engaged in that conversation. I think, Carol, what you brought up tonight about the, that graph, was helpful to us. We understood it one way, which was actually to show the commitment, but you saw it another way, and you wanted an explanation, so we were happy to provide that. But you push our thinking, and we take it seriously, and it's a deliberative process, as you well know by now, and we do not want to hasten the effort. We are a data-based, evidence-based type of committee. We try not to shoot from where we sit. We try to work hard and use all the information. And I think we are pretty demanding of a very excellent superintendent. So thank you very much.
Any questions from the council or comments? I think at this point, then, we can open it up to comments from the public. Please state your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Louisa Votava. I'm a South Kingstown resident. I've been at a few of these meetings, and just listening, especially tonight, it just struck me that Dr. Stringfellow, she just spoke so eloquently about the dual language immersion program. It just seems rather unfortunate that nobody on the, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, but nobody on this school committee really is able to speak very in depth about the growing gap that's been going on for years now between the general population and the students with disabilities and the economically disadvantaged students. It just seems like that shouldn't be like an aside thing that just happens, like that nobody's really paying attention to. There's committees and all this stuff going on with the dual language immersion, And I don't know, it just feels frustrating. Like, shouldn't that gap be looked at every year? Everybody should have a really good understanding of it. I know that's a lot of the conversation that's going on, and I really want to support that, that if you guys need data, then like figure out what that needs to be. But I mean, there's all this data about the dual language immersion and none about the growing gap that's been, that continues to grow. It really, if you close that gap, other communities have proven, and data proves that it really can increase the test scores of everybody in the community. So I know that for people who are not, are not economically disadvantaged, or they do not have a student with a disability, it's very easy to forget that population. But I think everybody needs to remember that if we serve and help to close the gap, then it's really going to help the community as a whole. I think that should be happening before we're adding on new programs. So, thank you.
Any other comments?
Hello, my name is Alicia Collins, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the growing achievement gaps that we're seeing. I have the data printed out here from the Rhode Island Department of Ed that shows over the past 5 years the test scores for students with disabilities to go down remarkably. So if anyone wants to check this out. With more students with disabilities being mainstreamed into general education classes as opposed to being taught separately in special education classes, teachers need classroom support more than ever before. Class size is growing. Teachers are being pressured to teach to a larger and more diverse group of students, and society dictates that these teachers adjust to both using new technology in the classroom and to the rigorous demands of Common Core instruction and the looming PARCC assessment, which will link teacher effectiveness to these test scores. The quality of education for all students is affected by the amount of classroom support available to teachers. We have cut nearly 40 teacher assistants, 2 more in this budget here, over the past 5 years. Our mental health service programs have greatly weakened over this time period as well, with teachers receiving less classroom support. Proficiency scores for all students in South Kingstown have dropped. Students with disabilities attending SK schools once experienced tremendous success in learning. In the 2000s, these students scored above the state average for their cohort at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Between 2009 and 2014, proficiency scores for students with disabilities in SK have dropped on average between 20 and 40%. If that was happening to the general ed population, I mean, there would be a really big issue. In this short 5-year time period, these same students are scoring well below the state average for their subgroup. The slide relating to mental health support that was shown last night, it showed that we're relying on nurses, general education teachers, and school administrators to support students emotionally. Yet these individuals do not have the training to do so. An emotional crisis presents itself to any of these staff members, and they have to track down a mental health professional to support the student. It would be a liability for a teacher or administrator to provide mental health support that they are not trained in to a student. This lack of adequate mental health support is just one example of where our special education programs are lacking. We have committed to staffing each of our schools with a full-time nurse. This is not a mandate from RIDE, but a commitment by our school committee to meeting the physical needs of our students. And I'm just hoping we can make that same commitment to the mental health needs of our students and be sure that a trained mental health professional is present in each of our schools every day. Districts across the state are closing achievement gaps, while the SK district is seeing yearly growth in achievement gaps. And it's not really fair to keep blaming the funding formula. I mean, it's not going to change. We're stuck with that for a time period. We need to figure out how to meet the needs regardless. Neighboring districts like Charahoe are closing gaps while ours grow wider. We enjoyed being a leading district in Rhode Island for a long time period. SK can no longer be compared to Barrington and East Greenwich. It's they're very different at this point. Last year, 7 students dropped out of Barrington High School and 6 from East Greenwich High School. This compared to 47 students who dropped out of SK high schools last year. Our schools are no longer classified by RIDE as leading or commended, but as typical and warning schools. We really have to figure out what it is about the state of our school programming that is lacking or not working, and commit to fixing the problem in the most cost-effective way possible. Changes can be made by altering programs as opposed to growing them. For example, having a speech pathologist work with reading specialists and general ed teachers to address language-based learning differences. This is being done in districts across Rhode Island. It doesn't mean that we have to hire more people. It's just a change in how our programs are running. I think if we don't really tackle this with the same commitment that a year ago the superintendent decided to tackle the dual language immersion program with that, and put so much into it, so many hours and so much resources. If we had really just done that to address the student achievement in the district, we might see different results. But now that commitment has to go towards fostering the dual language immersion program over the next years, and a lot of focus is going to go into that. And that can't be ignored. And I think if we don't address the achievement issue, people are going to keep leaving our district, and our town isn't going to be able to attract families, if we're, like Scott said, the 13th in the district or whatever it is, instead of in the top 3 like we were for so many years. And I feel like a program assessment and that these changes need to be implemented deliberately and swiftly. We don't really have time to just kind of wait and see what happens. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joanna Gregory, or Skokie, sorry. I said my maiden name. Last night, I live in Wakefield. Last night at the school committee meeting, I shared my thoughts about special education services in our district. And I shared that I believe that there is a systemic failure to identify, educate, and provide services for children with learning differences in South Kingstown. I am especially concerned because just 5 years ago, our district identified 18% of our student population as needing special education. Currently, South Kingstown only qualifies 12% of our students in special ed. This appears to be incongruent with the United States Department of Education statistics that show learning disabilities are increasing nationally. Studies show that autism has quadrupled over a short period of time. And further, according to the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, dyslexia affects 1 in 5 children in our schools right now. And yet South Kingstown is decreasing in special education populations. How could that be? I believe it's because we are failing to identify those children who struggle with learning differences such as dyslexia. Instead, we just put them on a merry-go-round of watching these children at risk or utilizing a tiered approach that wastes valuable time for some children, and for some children years and years. And what happens is they wind up not graduating, not being able to read. A tragic, tragic thing. For example, with the tiered system that we have now, a child might be identified as being at risk in reading, and we implement RTI, which is response to intervention, using a tiered process of instruction. It is an appropriate method to do that. Yet when this type of tiered approach delays and/or fails to remediate in any meaningful way, or we fail to use scientific, evidence-based diagnostic measures to pinpoint a suspected disability, we are doing a grave disservice to our children. We are failing to provide them the services that they are entitled to under federal and state law. Could it be that our children are struggling, and this might be one of the reasons 2 of our schools have fallen into the warning category based on student achievement? Are we proud of our dropout rate at the high school? We should not be. Could this be why our enrollment in SK is down and we are scrambling for ways to increase it? I asked the school committee last night to look at these very serious issues with our special education department and to create a special task force that looks at these areas to see what is working, what is not. Are we identifying students correctly? Do we have the right programs in place in order to address their learning needs? And more importantly, how can we take corrective action? As a town council, we cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the problems and, dare I say, stonewalling parents, our taxpayers in this town, encounter when they come to the schools and they're concerned about their children's learning. At last night's meeting, Dr. Stringfellow pointed out that the district and the surrounding community resources do have programs to support students with various issues, and that is a good step. However, it appeared to me that, again, the talk surrounded children who are, as Dr. Stringfellow put it, anxious. I pointed out that anxiety is highly related and most often comorbid with autism and dyslexia. It seems to me to be a recurring theme that our children are simply categorized as anxious in the South Kingstown schools without proper evidence-based testing. Therefore, we are not upholding our commitment to the children of South Kingstown, morally or according to federal and state law. It is the duty and the responsibility of the local education authority, our school district, by federal law, to test children who are suspected to have a disability. To have school staff make a determination that children are anxious without determining, testing, getting medical diagnosis, listening to medical diagnosis from outside evaluators, or to not get to the root of the underlying cause results in our children, these children right here, who have the ability to succeed by not giving them the proper individualized educational program, it sets up our children for failure, which is unforgivable. I understand that this subject is difficult due to financial concerns. However, scientific studies have shown that it costs school districts less money to identify and address learning differences at an early age. Pay now or pay much more later. As when children move on from grade to grade, it takes longer and more intensive remediation programs to rectify our failures than when they are young in the school years. For example, if a child has dyslexia, a neurological-based language disability, that child needs a learning program to be able to learn phonics, reading, writing, spelling, etc. If that child does not receive that explicit instruction in the form of a scientifically research evidence-based program in their early years, it is more expensive and more intensive to use a remediation program later in their later years. Each year that goes by, each semester that we keep them in RTI without being properly tested by evaluators, neuropsychologists, people who can make those diagnoses, we are causing irreparable harm to our children, especially in terms of denying children a free and appropriate public education. I shared with the school committee that in a meeting with the governor's education staff last week, it was clear that this is an important issue for our governor and for our state. South Kingstown does have an opportunity to become a leader. We truly do. We're sitting around the table talking about this, and we have the opportunity to do something about it right now. We can recognize the challenges in providing special education services and to the general ed population. Just doesn't only have to be about special ed, but right now there's a definite need in special ed. It's a broken system, and something needs to be done. And yes, it can be costly if we keep turning a blind eye and not catching these learning differences early. But we need to say, for the town and to the children, that we are willing to find ways to ensure that everyone in our district, all kids in our district, are receiving an appropriate education with meaningful programs to support them. Creating a task force to examine these issues is just the first step, and one in which I would hope the town council is invested in to ensure that we address the attendance rates that Dr. Stringfellow spoke about so alarmingly high, the dropout rates, the low enrollment. Why are our kids not going to school? Well, we know from studies and from research that if a child's learning disabilities are not, or differences are not being addressed early on, those children are the children that drop out. There are even statistics that 47% of the population in the jails are people who have dyslexia or learning differences. What does that say about our children? Do we want our children to wind up like that? Why are we spending the money on a program which the program is wonderful, Dual-Mer. I mean, I'm all for a program like that, but if we have broken systems and our children are not achieving, why in the world are we spending $300,000 on a program that I heard tonight, we don't know if it'll work. We don't know what the enrollment is going to be. We don't know why people are leaving our schools. As a business person, that makes no sense to me. You have to know what your customers are, what they want. If we haven't done that work, if we don't know why they're leaving the district, why they're going to the public school, why some are being homeschooled, I know parents, okay, it's anecdotal, but I know parents who have taken their kids out of the public school system, South Kingstown, because they're not doing the job for the disabled student. So it's easier for them to take their child out and homeschool them. How does that affect our community? It does nothing for us. Others are leaving to go to private schools, some are district-placed schools, and worst of all, not being identified with learning disabilities and not getting an appropriate education that they are entitled to. And it's one of the basic principles of our country and one that we should uphold for our children in South Kingstown. Thank you.
Jim O'Neill, Matunic. I'm asking the town council not to agree to the increase in the budget requested by the school committee until the school committee addresses over the next few months the issues on the per student expenditure and the loss of population in our school facilities. I totally agree with the school resource officer that's needed and the one-on-one technology devices. Last year we had some line items back and forth on that. I consider that a new program. I really think that you should mothball any idea of this immersion program. I think the school committee needs to spend their time on the following. Parents I talk to want to have their 5th graders and 6th graders back in elementary school. They want all 5 elementary schools opened in this town. That is overwhelmingly, matter of fact, I can almost say 100% with everyone I've talked to. This may require, at the last meeting I referred to Chairwoman Mosher's 2010 letter, maybe the 6th graders at South Road, all 6th graders, or maybe 5th and 6th going back to all schools and opening them. I think Curtis Corner is the obvious school to close. You saw Steve's graph tonight, and I've spoken about this many times, a 1,200 student decline from 4,383 K through 12s back in 2001 to 3,195 today. That's almost 1,200 students. That's probably a $500,000 savings by closing Curtis Corner. Much of it I'm referring to what Dr. Hicks said 5-6 years ago. Most of it would be in transportation, some in operations. It'd be minimum staff that you'd have to lose if you opened up South Road. Minimum staff. There's money to be made here if we did things smartly. Not only the potential $500,000 there, but that's one of the reasons that the education funding formula has penalized South Kingstown. And 5 years ago, we got $8.5 million from the state. This year, you saw the graph, 7.3. And also, too, all the new education money that's been approved by the state, South Kingstown's received none of that new money, averaging about $25 million a year. Double whammy, I've spoke to that before. So, going back to when Commissioner Gist was here, and I remember speaking to her, and she says, you guys have money to burn. Empty classrooms, you've got all your schools open. We had dropped from about 4,400 to about 3,700 kids. What is she to think? No wonder we lost the money, because we had no efficiency in place of how to use our facilities. So what I'm saying is, if we close Curtis Corner, I think we'd have a great reason to sit in front of the new commissioner, whoever that will be, and explain that we have understood the efficiency that is needed, and we'd like to have this money back at least for the next 3-5 years that the education funding formula will be in place. Absolutely no to the immersion program. This is speculation. Whether it's $200,000 or $300,000, not this year, it's got to be delayed. And Ms. Stringfellow said before, she looked right at the council, and she said it tonight. They are trying to find out if this will bring students back to South Kingstown. Particularly, we've already closed small businesses in the pre-K, K, first grade area. This will eliminate them, so I certainly hope some members of the town council are listening to that, because this is a direct attack on small business. So, if we could save $200,000 from the immersion cut, maybe get $300,000 to $500,000 back by closing Curtis Corner, and maybe $300,000 to $500,000 ride savings and our fair share of new money, that's $1 million. Maybe we can help some programs like this. But if we can't be efficient, then we've got a serious problem. I think what is going to happen here is that I mentioned Curtis Corner. I wanted to mention the second thing, the PPE, the per pupil expenditures. And it was brought up at the last meeting with the school committee. And just using Mrs. Stringfellow's numbers that she put in the brochure the last time, they had South Kingstown at $18,035 per pupil. North Kingstown, a very light community, spends $15,070. That means we spend $9.9 million more, just using our 3,300 kids we have now, which includes pre-K. Cumberland, a little larger than we are, they spend $12,278. South Kingstown spends $19 million more than Cumberland. Barrington, $14,217. South Kingstown spends $12.6 million more using the PPE, and I'll subtract $2.6 million out of that just for transportation costs. Barrington's much smaller. We still spend $10 million more than Barrington. These are all cohorts. These are all... Anyway, the committee is taking the wrong course of action here. And I think what you really need to do is take a look at the state. Sometimes I think we get very selfish here. We have a new governor with incredible policy decisions in front of her. A new head of the General Assembly, many new members. Incredible difficulties, same problems that the governor has looking ahead of us. We're going to have a new education commissioner. Maybe she can address these immersion issues. And I've always loved Dr. Mega, and Dr. Mega said it clearly last year. We are over-facilitated, and a lot of that extra money can go towards students and programs. Thank you.
Has there been any further discussion on the transportation issue as becoming part of the funding formula? I know the last time we spoke, I thought there was going to be some kind of meeting with the commissioner between Representative Fogarty and yourself, Kristen, and whoever else was going. I think some of the other legislators possibly.
So since that time, I think the commissioner got a new job.
Right.
And that's in Oklahoma. And so I don't know, Representative Fogarty is in the audience. I don't know if that invitation still stands, but certainly we have already made our commitment to the representative that if an invitation is available, we would certainly be able to be happy to sit with the commissioner. Marianne Crawford and I and Michelle Brousseau, who I can't really make out, but I'm sure is here somewhere. Hi, Michelle. We did testify at the request of Representatives Tansey and Fogarty in front of talking about the charter school elements of the funding formula, and largely our conversations centered around concepts of costs that are borne by the public school districts that are not borne by all, and that those costs sometimes are more heavily weighted on different communities. And certainly our community, one of the heaviest burdens is the transportation cost, and why that would not be in the market basket to be able to be distributed when it is a state law that we transport our children. We talked very specifically about a number of items, but most of them are tuitions that we mentioned a little earlier, and the transportation. That resulted in having Andrea Castaneda, who is the Chief Fiscal Officer at RIDE, call us very promptly, within a day. And I thought, okay, what's this going to lead to? She came down to South Kingstown, spent a couple of hours with Mary Ann and I going over what our concerns were so that she could understand them more deeply. My understanding is she then went on to meet with a few other chief financial officers and superintendents to really get a sense of this. This morning we saw that she is meeting with the RISA officers along with Commissioner Gist to better understand this concept. And I know that Representative Tansey has been keeping us in the loop about all of the other testimony. So while we haven't garnered that meeting, and I'll be quiet now and let Kathy speak, but that's what I know to be true. That's the work that Michelle Brousseau and Mary Ann and I have done.
Yes, so I've heard about your meeting, and actually I just came from Health, Education, and Welfare for the past 3.5 hours. I think I'm on my 15th hour right now. A lot of things that you discussed were discussed at Health, Education, and Welfare today on some issues about technology and doing just to kind of backtrack here, putting a commission together to look at technology to, bring everybody into the 21st century in all the schools in Rhode Island. So hopefully that will go through. We also looked at some issues regarding ACOA and talking about that, and Mr. Abbott was there today from RIDE, and I think he's somebody that we could work with. I was going to talk to you about that. We haven't met, as myself, I haven't had a day off yet to set aside a date, so we're probably looking at maybe April 3rd or April, it's 2 weeks from that, the 17th. As possible dates to go. Again, I have nothing confirmed, but I think we'll certainly bring Mr. Abbott in because he was talking about really working with all of us on ACOA, and I thought that transportation and the outlier versus all the other communities might be a good thing to meet with him first and have our kind of ducks in a row and go meet with Commissioner Gist if she's even seeing us, even with our friend, who's the person you just met with? Andrea, yes. So hopefully Andrea got a better picture of what we were talking about when you met with her. Tomorrow, she did good, excellent, because that was very interesting, that meeting. Tomorrow is actually another meeting of the funding formula, and this is looking at the special education component of it and the balance between the two. So that starts, I believe, at 4 o'clock tomorrow. So I will be back up at the State House for that hearing. So things are ongoing, and I certainly. Teresa Tansey and I are talking about the transportation bill. I'll probably be putting something in probably next week regarding transportation and in South Kingstown, so we might look to you for some more information in the school committee. I have been in constant contact with Michelle Brousseau, have I not, Michelle? So there's a lot of things that are going on, and we're trying to address it as best we can. And I'm letting all the other reps know up there about South Kingstown and seeing us drop from 3 to 13th, and talking about really kind of moving to that move to mediocrity, which was what my concern was when I was on the council when this was put forward. That it's starting to take shape, and we're seeing it right here in South Kingstown because, as they know, nobody looks and has done as bad on that funding formula than the town of South Kingstown. And anybody who'll stop and talk to me, I talk to them about it. So we're doing the best that we can up there. Teresa was in the hearings today, and we'll continue to keep fighting for South Kingstown and see if we can make some changes, because I have to wait and see what happens tomorrow, because I got a front row seat with where I'm seated to our new governor and her budget, and I think we're probably going to have some unpleasant surprises in there. So this is what the problem is, and I wish I had better news for you, but we're just going to continue to fight up there. All right, so that's my report, okay? 15 hours in. I hope I made sense. I'm sorry if I didn't.
Thank you.
With all the discussion about this gap and the need in special education, and these three lovely ladies got up and spoke so eloquently. I'm sure it's on your radar. I'm sure that we're not the first to hear this. And I think one of the comments that was made with concern to the dual language immersion, and I could be wrong, but what I'm gathering from maybe their perspective is there's a little bit of concern that if so much energy is put to this new program, that the gaps that are already there will become worse. I understand that the dual language immersion is something you all have looked into and are very excited about. And going forward, that will take a lot of your time. We do have a big gap, and there are holes in the system. And if so much of the energy goes into this new program, I am concerned about the needs. And I am concerned that that gap next year when you come back may be greater. I just hope that you're not spreading yourselves too thin with the excitement of a new program, and really take heed in what they're saying. And, you know, change does come from one person coming forward. It truly does. That's how all change starts. So I appreciate you don't want to be reactive to one person saying something. However, it's one person's voice that, if heard by all of you, can certainly make a difference. And I hope it does. I hope that, budget aside, you can really look at that in our schools going forward, because that's a great concern.
Kristen, and then Jonathan.
Thank you so much for saying that. I agree with you that one voice, a few voices, passionate and committed, absolutely can make a difference, and that was very, very well stated. I think I want to assure folks that this gap has been a major focus of the school committee retreats, of school committee training, of administrative retreats, of teacher training. Those pieces are district-wide. So there is and I see the comparison between this very, very, very outlined need of the achievement gap. The achievement gap slides have been a part of our discussion ever since I came here. I know that to be true, and it's always at the forefront. Questions for everyone that we hire, questions for every program that comes in, that this is something that we would like to close, absolutely. There are deliberate steps taken in every school every day to close these gaps. And so I can see where, because we're in the budget venue and we're talking about a new program, we have already existing programs, and we tried to address several pages worth of indications of how we're trying to combat the achievement gap. That will continually need the support that was asked for here tonight, and the support that these folks, our teachers, our administrators, are deeply committed to. So I want to give you that assurance that this is not new to us. It is something we've been deliberately putting forth much effort and focus. And things like the preschool program. We deliberately and intentionally opened more sections of special education preschool. And that met with a lot of resistance, as some of you might recall. But we did so because we were certain that what these ladies spoke of earlier, early intervention is one of the research-based knowns. We know that intervening early and providing that systemic support, albeit costly for the district, worth it, valued. And we, I mean, I'm not going to go over each and every one of the programs, but this year, the program that we're bringing on new is dual language, but we are not abandoning all of the other trainings and programs and interventions that are going on. And even as recently as the new high school principal that we just hired, one of the core beliefs of the interview team were, is this a person who believes in all kids? is this a person who understands that all children need to be given a basic program, not a less than basic program? All students need to be challenged and provide rigorous learning experiences, but all children learn differently. And so I want to assure you that that has been a part of this committee's and this school department's focused. But do we need to still do work? Yes. And I think Scott explained that it's going to need some more focused work, and we were entertaining the concepts that were brought up from the community.
One question
Jonathan.
sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of say, and I think pretty much everybody here, as far as I know, would share the sentiment. Teresa Tansey really has been a tireless advocate for us, and I think when I think back from some number of years ago, it really was kind of the thought process. Well, what we're going to get from the state is what we're going to get from the state regarding any issue. And, I think that it really is tireless, and she's very passionate about advocating for our needs. And I think people across the state obviously are seeing that. And so it, kind of gives me hope. And I know that there is great economic concern, as Rep. Fogarty brought forward. So it's not easy. But we do expect a lot from our delegation. But I think when we see some, I don't know what exactly the resolutions are, the specific issue by issue, but we have talked about resolutions at the school committee table that we've made requests, and the requests have been met. And so I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that.
And once again, we can do joint resolutions, which seem to be helpful in the past. But I just wanted to ask a question. Scott, when you said we were number 13 in the state, I thought you were only talking about technology. Are you talking overall?
No, I was talking specifically about the computer-based initiative.
Because I've heard it referred now that we're number 13 in the state for every, throughout.
I'm willing to have other people own that. That isn't what I said.
Okay, that's what I thought you were talking
Because I came in only about 45 minutes ago, so I was taking notes from one of the other persons
Right,
that
and
spoken.
I
So
heard
thank you for
people-
clarifying that. I won't go around saying that. And I want to make sure that I said that fair funding formula was for Friday at 4 o'clock, not tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Okay, I just want to make sure.
No, it was said before you said it, Kathy, so, okay. I was just getting a little nervous there. I was hearing it over and over. I was like, we're not number 13. Okay, we can. Excuse me?
We're way lower than we used to be. We're not like in the top.
Well, I just want to clarify what Scott said. Anybody want to comment on that? No? Okay.
I mean, yeah, I don't know where we are exactly, but if you look at the NECAP data, we're kind of in, as I've looked at it, we're kind of like in the top third.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Which, I think we're 36 districts. So, I mean, the 13 in at least in that regard, is not necessarily inaccurate. I don't think we're quite that low, but maybe 10 or 11. And I think the other thing too, because we talk about wanting data, but then sometimes we bring, even people who say they want data still bring in anecdotal evidence. And, and I think sometimes we say, because, I mean, I love this town, and everybody that's here, I think, nobody that's here and nobody that's being involved, doesn't love this town. It's a great town. It's a great community. We have a lot to be proud of. But I think sometimes we get carried away with saying, well, we have all these programs, and they are great programs, but it's almost like we're saying it in a vacuum, like Cherahoe doesn't have great programs, and North Kingstown doesn't have great programs. Well, guess what? I bet people that live in Cherahoe love that. In North Kingstown, they love that. And Exeter, West Greenwich, they love that. And they also have great programs. So I don't know that we can quantitatively say, well, our test scores maybe aren't as good, but we have the best programs outside of that. So I think that's where the test scores really need to kind of stay relevant in terms of if we are comparing district to district. And it probably was 5 or 6 years ago, we were looking up at Barrington and East Greenwich, and that was it. And maybe we'll never catch them. But now we're looking up at more, and that's where I come from with the concern of maybe the solution isn't money, but we have to at least kind of look at that.
You know, I'm new at this, so be patient with me, and I felt like having some knowledge of special needs and socioeconomic disparity, I took looking at dual language immersion very seriously. And as the superintendent knows and the chair knows, I did my own research, right? And have shared that with members of the audience on different occasions. And so I just, for the record, want to share that there is academic research, and in particular with a group of academicians named Thomas and Collier on dual language immersion. I'm scrolling through it right now, showing that not just with English language learners, but with Caucasian students, African American students, low SES students, socioeconomic support students, that reading and math scores go up dramatically in the dual language immersion experience. So it's actually, it's getting lost sometimes because I care passionately about making sure that our special education needs are met. I just don't want us to confuse DLI with not being a tool for helping us close the achievement gap in the district.
Somebody else on the committee want to speak there? Okay. Mike.
I wanted just to make a really 10-second comment, piggybacking on what Jonathan Daly-LaBelle said, in terms of Representative Tansey being a great advocate for the town because she lives here as well. I just want to say I appreciate the fact that Representative Fogarty is here because she also served on the council and has been very involved in the school system. I think she's going to be a wonderful advocate for the people of our town up at the State House. I know this is her first year in her tenure there, but I know both of them are equally committed to serving the population here in South Kingstown, so I think we have a lot to be proud of.
All right. Are those, well, speaking for myself, I'm really excited to hear talk about a special task force to focus on the achievement gap. I hope it looks beyond special ed and at the impoverished student population as well, because we have mandates to serve both. And, you know, I agree that it's great that, you know, the council and the committee work closely together through this process. It's been a learning process for me, that's for sure. And hopefully for the people at home watching and the people in the audience. So thank you for all your time putting this budget together. And I think with that we can adjourn this meeting. It is 9:34.